In the heart of a scorched desert, where death arrives quicker than a radio signal, a female veteran is left hanging from a 100-foot cliff, hands bound, no one in sight. Below her, a deadly drop. Above, silence. As the rope begins to fray, no one could have predicted what would happen next. 3 wild mustangs appear from the dust, and what they do leaves the entire border patrol in stunned silence. Sierra Verde was not a place people came to without reason. It was a forgotten stretch of land tucked between sun-scorched hills and nameless dunes, where the sky was so blue it felt hollow, and the wind swept through as if trying to erase every trace of life that ever existed. The air carried the scent of dry earth, salt, bleached bones, and ashes. And in that haunting silence, people sometimes caught sight of a woman, tall, lean, walking calmly across the desert, like she had been born of it. Rachel McAllister wasn't a local. She had no family in Arizona, no close friends on the force, and no one had ever seen her smile. At the Echo Ridge station, they called her Silent Doc, a nickname that sounded playful, but no one dared repeat it when caught in her stare. It was the kind of look that had seen the very worst war could throw at a human being and survived just enough to carry it forever. Rachel had once served as a Navy corpsman with the U.S. Marines, Afghanistan, Helmand Province, March that year. An ambush in the night. Her team, 12 men, 11 of them died on the spot. She half her body crushed, clinging to life under a pile of rubble, using her own medical belt to keep her intestines from spilling out. And she lived. That should have been good news. But from that day on, every night she woke drenched in cold sweat, her mouth silent but her eyes screaming. She turned down rear echelon posts, avoided the media, and stayed far from anything that could brand her a war hero. Rachel didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted a place where no one asked about the past. Somewhere harsh enough to keep her mind from playing that same reel of painful memories. So she transferred to Echo Ridge, a tiny border outpost in southern Arizona, far from tourist maps and tucked into the nowhere of Sierra Verde. Here, the wind didn't carry gunfire, only sand and the vague shadows drifting from the Mexico border. The station chief at Echo Ridge was Thorne Carlisle, a man with gray-flecked hair, broad shoulders, and a voice low and clipped. He'd served too. Had medals, had once been hailed as a symbol of border discipline. But his eyes? Rachel had seen eyes like that in the mirror, cold, hard, empty. The kind of man who had learned to lock his emotions in a drawer because the alternative was to shatter. The only one at the station who still held a shred of curiosity about Rachel was Ellie Navarro, an internal affairs officer on temporary assignment from El Paso. Petite, curly-haired, always biting her lip when she thought. Officially, she was there for procedural audits, but Rachel knew the type. Ellie didn't just read paperwork. She read people. A few times, Ellie had invited Rachel for coffee after shifts, only to be met with a silent nod in return. "You always this quiet?" Ellie once asked. Rachel gave a half-smile, one that never reached her eyes. No one listens. One morning in early June, the sun hadn't yet scorched the ground, but the air already burned the skin. Station Chief Thorne called Rachel into his office. A folded map sat on his desk, with a red mark across a region labeled El Cencio, a rarely visited valley once rumored to be an old cartel route back when the gangs still thrived. "Got a vague report of movement here," Thorne said, tapping the area with a finger. His voice was flat. "Could be hunters, could be runners, unclear. Take a look. No need for backup." "Okay," Rachel replied simply. She preferred going alone. No one to talk to. No one to see her flinch at the sound of a snapping twig. She picked up the map, eyes scanning it. She noticed a few markings that differed from her usual charts, but said nothing. Terrain updates were routine. Thorne looked at her a beat longer, almost scrutinizing. "You sure? I can assign someone." Rachel stood tall. Her tone never wavered. "I'm fine." 30 minutes later, she ran a final gear check. Water, map, flashlight, med kit, sidearm, combat knife, satellite communicator, and her short-barreled AR-15. The sun was already climbing over the eastern rocks, casting long shadows of the yucca shrubs like ghostly silhouettes. She mounted her ATV, a fat-tired desert vehicle, and headed out toward El Cencio. Eyes fixed on the trail, ears tuned to the engine's growl, nose filled with the smell of burning fuel and dry dirt. Beneath her long-sleeved shirt, the scars from Helmand ached whenever the road jolted her body. But she didn't care. The road into Alcencio was jagged, cutting through narrow canyons and bone-dry creek beds left over from last winter. Rachel drove until she reached a crumbling checkpoint, just rusted metal sheets and cracked concrete. She dismounted, scanned the area. Sand was soft under her boots, no tire marks. But she crouched down. Beneath a flat rock were boot prints. Deep, narrow, weight pushed into the heel. Someone had been carrying something heavy. Not one person, 3, maybe 4. The prints were fading but not gone. They led into a narrow pass. Rachel didn't speak. She rose, tightened her grip on the R, then a sound behind her. Breath. Then a blow, hard and brutal. Light vanished. Everything shattered into blinding white. When she came to, her head felt filled with lead. Her arms were tied behind her, throat so dry she couldn't swallow. Sand clung to her clothes. The sun slashed her vision like a blade. 3 men stood over her, faces covered, clothes dusty, heavy packs slung across their backs. One of them toyed with her rifle, sneering. The tallest one said something in Spanish. She caught fragments. Patrulla, mujer, no disparar, dejar morir. The others laughed. One knelt, yanked her upright. She couldn't stand, her knees buckled. They didn't care. They dragged her across sand, through scrub, up a jagged rock path. At the top, they tied a frayed rope around her waist, the knots in practice like climbers. The rope was worn, frayed. Then someone shoved her forward. She didn't fall. She hung, suspended, between sky and stone. No more words. No bullet. Just a slow death. A death with no trace. They walked away. She heard footsteps fade, then nothing. Only the wind, and her heartbeat. There was nothing between her and the earth now but a fraying rope, pulled taut around her waist. No more sound except for the wind howling across the cliffs, whistling through the cracks like the desert itself was weeping. Rachel hung suspended, between sky and canyon, her body abandoned, nameless, hopeless. Her eyes were wide at first, panicked. But that passed. Now they were empty. The rope was anchored to a ledge above her, but where it rubbed against the rock, it was slowly being ground down. Each time the wind swayed her body, the rope twitched, and each twitch unraveled a few more fibers, sending dust cascading into the void below like a countdown she could not stop. She tried to scream, but her throat was so dry it seized. Her tongue was cracked, blood oozing from her chapped lips. The sun lashed at her face like a flaying knife. The small digital thermometer on her wrist, the one thing the men hadn't taken, flashed red. 109. Her skin blistered. Sweat no longer came. Her body was evaporating, second by second, and as always when reality became unbearable, the past returned. Rachel closed her eyes, not from fatigue, but to escape. Helmand, Afghanistan. Gunfire swallowed every other sound. Black smoke billowed from a burning Humvee. Someone was screaming in English. Courtman, Rachel, report, we're pinned down. She crawled through collapsing sand, wrapping a tourniquet around a man's shattered leg. A supply truck exploded nearby, sending debris into her face. She yelled, "Move! Move!" Then, an earth-shattering boom. Darkness. When she woke up, the screaming had stopped. The stench of burning flesh still clung to the air. She pulled herself from a pile of bricks, a gash running across her abdomen, blood soaking into her armor. But the other 11, those she had laughed with, sweated with, sworn to die beside, were gone. Guilt is a monster. It doesn't kill you quickly. It bleeds you slowly, through every restless night, every glance in the mirror, every moment when you try to smile but can't. Since coming home, Rachel had never slept indoors. She laid her bedroll on the porch where the wind could reach her, so she could hear anything, everything. She cut her hair short like a man's, maybe trying to forget the long strands her teammates used to tease her about. She didn't drink, didn't go to bars, didn't hold anyone. She existed, nothing more. And now she was dangling again, by someone else's hand. Betrayed not by war this time, but by people. A thought drifted through her mind. This is how I die, like a stray dog. But strangely, she didn't feel fear. She felt sorrow. Sorrow for her mother, who she hadn't called in 3 years. Sorrow for the apology letter she never wrote to Sergeant Doyle's family. Sorrow for herself, for believing once that she could save people and ending up as the last one left. Her vision blurred, either from sunlight or tears. A vulture circled above. They had exceptional senses. They knew. They were coming. Rachel tried to shift her weight. A mistake. The rope made a ripping sound. She could feel the fibers tearing like the slow scream of a soul. She froze. Breath caught in her throat. The wind swayed her body again, a cruel game of gravity and chance. Her wrists, tied behind her back, were swollen, blood circulation long since cut off. Each heartbeat stabbed through her shoulders like ice picks. But the real pain wasn't physical. It was the silence. She had grown used to the sounds of helicopters, the crackle of radio, the bang of friendly gunfire. But here, there was nothing. No comms, no one knew where she was, no one was coming. 1 second, then another, then 10 minutes. Time lost meaning. The sun pressed on. Rachel closed her eyes again. She whispered, or maybe just thought, a quiet prayer. Not for herself, but for those she'd failed to protect. Maybe this time, finally, she wouldn't survive. Her skull pulsed. A wave of nausea washed over her. The rocks below swayed like a lullaby, urging her to let go, to fall, to be done with it. But then, something stirred inside her gut. A sound, soft, distant. Not a voice, not the wind. A sound that anyone who'd lived in the American Southwest would recognize instantly. Hoofbeats. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. Impossible. No one brought horses out here. This was the desert. No trails, no riders. No one had ridden through El Cencio in over a decade, but the hoofbeats grew closer. Clip, clop, clip, clop, steady, unhurried. She forced her eyes open, blinking hard against the glare. Through the heat shimmer rising off the rocks, she saw shadows. 3 of them. A black horse, large, muscular, glistening under the sun, led the way. Behind it, a chestnut mare, and finally, a smaller gray with a mane like smoke. She shut her eyes, opened them again. Still there. They were real. And then, the impossible happened. The black horse, rather than bolting or retreating like any wild creature might, walked slowly toward the cliff's edge, where her rope was tied to a large rock. It lowered its head. Its muzzle touched the rope. It sniffed, then lifted its head again, eyes scanning the surroundings, as if thinking. Rachel nearly passed out again. A hallucination? No, she could see the dust rising beneath its hooves, felt the breeze from its mane on her cheeks, smelled the raw, sweaty scent of a living horse. The black stallion turned back and nodded, subtle, deliberate. The other 2 horses moved forward like they'd rehearsed it. The chestnut took position on the left, bracing its legs, eyes focused on the rope. The gray stepped close to the edge, using its smaller frame to block the rope from slipping off the rock. The black one began to pull, with its teeth, gently. 1 inch. Rachel felt her body shift upward slightly. She gasped. Another inch. The rope groaned softly, like a whisper of life crawling back. And for the first time in hours, Rachel wept. Not from fear, not from pain, but from hope. At first, it was just the smallest movement, as if the earth tilted by the slightest degree. Rachel felt her body lift a few more inches, the rope digging into her sun-scorched skin. She didn't dare believe what was happening. She opened one eye, then the other. The black horse, that phantom risen from the desert, was leaning forward, jaws clamped around the rope, muscles straining as it pulled. Veins bulged in its neck and shoulders, flexing beneath the brutal sunlight. Rachel's fingers instinctively curled into fists, like if she focused hard enough, maybe she could lend it strength. Behind it, the other 2 horses stood still, like statues. The chestnut mare tilted its head, ears tuned toward Rachel. The smaller gray crept even closer to the ledge, using its body to brace the rope and prevent it from slipping off the edge. The desert wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of dust and horse sweat. A fine mist of sand rose into the air, blurring every motion, making the scene look like some kind of silent reckoning. No voices, no sirens, no engines, only hoofbeats and the soft, urgent groan of a rope pulled over rock. Rachel had never seen anything more surreal. The rope jerked violently as the black stallion yanked again. Rachel's whole body screamed. It felt like her spine was being peeled apart, vertebra by vertebra. But she didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat was nothing but cracked silence. When she was raised just above the most dangerous part of the drop, her feet banged against the cliff wall, sharp, painful grounding. She tried not to move. If the rope gave way now, everything would turn to dust. A whisper echoed inside her, an old voice. One of her fallen teammates. "Hold on, you survived to tell this story, Doc." She closed her eyes, like praying. If this is a hallucination, please, don't let it end yet. A lifetime in uniform had taught Rachel never to believe in miracles. But in that moment, beneath the blazing sky, in the dead heart of the desert, a wild horse was pulling her back from death. Not a rescue crew, not a fellow soldier, not anyone assigned to save her. just beings the world labeled as untamable. She watched her body inch toward the light, closer to solid ground. Every pull was a silent oath, every second was a battle won. She didn't know how long it took to reach the top. Time had vanished. There was only her breath, the rope, and the thud of hooves grinding into sand. And then, at last, she saw it. The ledge. The rock where the rope was tied, worn nearly to snapping. But just then, the black horse gave one final pull. Its strongest yet. Rachel's body slid forward, slamming into the jagged edge of the rock. But she didn't fall. The rope had done its job. A breath escaped her lips, not even clear if it came from her or the desert itself. She collapsed onto the blistering surface, her hands still bound behind her. She couldn't push herself up, couldn't sit. She lay face down in the sand, dust clinging to her cheeks, sweat soaking her tangled hair. 1 second, 2. The hoofbeats hadn't left. Now, they were closer. Rachel opened her eyes. The black horse, massive and unwavering, stood right beside her. It lowered its head. Warm breath from its nostrils brushed against her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. No growl. No threat. Just a gaze. Deep and dark, like it had swallowed the noise of the world. She felt the faintest touch of its muzzle on her forehead, like a question or an answer. She was alive. Time passed like a haze. Rachel had no idea how long it had been since she'd been pulled up. The sun had started its descent, casting long shadows over scorched rock. Her stomach was hollow. Her arms burned. But she didn't black out. The 3 horses stood around her like silent sentinels. They didn't flee, didn't wander off. They just stayed, like something ancient bound them to this moment. Rachel rolled onto her side, wincing inch by inch, until her back rested against a cracked stone slab. She looked at the black horse. Its eyes never blinked. In a hoarse whisper, she murmured like speaking to a ghost. "What are you? How do I owe you this much?" It didn't answer. Just stood quietly, head slightly tilted, ears flicking at the breeze. She gasped, each breath pulling from the last scrap of strength in her. Then a shadow fell across her chest. The black horse had stepped closer. Not afraid of humans. Not afraid of her. It stood as if, waiting. She rasped, "Your name? What is it?" No reply. She blinked. Saw the long scar down its shoulder running from its neck to its foreleg. An old wound. Unmistakable. "I'll call you Sable," she whispered. As dusk spread across the scorched sands, Rachel knew she couldn't stay there. Not if she wanted to live. But she was still tied, dehydrated, with no means of communication. Almost as if it sensed that exact thought, Sable stepped forward. Silent. And then, doing something no one would believe, it bent its front knees. A motion only seen in the most highly trained horses. Rachel stared in disbelief, her swollen eyes fixed. You want me to get on?" Sable didn't move. Its mane stirred in the wind like black smoke. Rachel clenched her jaw, gathered what little strength remained, and dragged herself toward it. She clutched its mane, hoisting her half-dead body over its back. No saddle, no reins. Nothing but hope. She let out a broken gasp as Sable slowly rose, carrying a battered, half-conscious woman on its back. Once again, the horse led the way, and the night swallowed their first steps home. Rachel came to as the sky turned to honey, dusk bleeding across the desert in molten streaks. The distant ridges glowed in rust-red hues, the horizon stained with the color of dried blood, vivid and cold. She didn't know how long she drifted in and out atop the black horse, only that now she was lying propped against a twisted, leafless tree. Her entire body throbbed like every bone had been baked in fire. Her hands were still bound, wrists numb, sliced raw by nylon cord. Her uniform was caked in dried blood, dust, sweat, and something else she didn't want to name. But the first thing she saw when she cracked her eyes open wasn't the sky. It wasn't the pain. It was Sable's eyes, dark, watching. No more than an arm's length away, he was lying beside her, untethered, unrestrained, but still there. Sable tilted his head and gave a soft breath against Rachel's cheek. It was warm, like the glow of a campfire in winter, gentle enough to make her eyes sting. She turned slowly, bracing herself against the gnarled tree trunk to sit upright, her throat letting out a low, dry rasp. Her mind spun. Her muscles screamed as if they'd been frozen from within. But she was alive, because of this wild, nameless creature. "No one's gonna believe this," she murmured, voice as cracked as dry leaves brushing stone. Sable exhaled softly. His warm breath ghosted over her neck like a quiet reply. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, Rachel pressed her weight into the horse's mane, fighting the tremble in her legs as she stood. Her body threatened to collapse, but there was something in Sable's eyes, a wordless resolve, that held her upright. A trust that defied logic, stronger than any morphine she'd ever been injected with. Then, Sable bent his knees again. Rachel didn't know where he had learned to do that, or if it was just instinct. Either way, it was clear. He was offering his back again. She placed one hand on his neck and pulled herself up. This time, she didn't fall. Nightfall crept in. There were no lights to guide them, only the stars. But Sable moved like he knew every inch of the desert. He crossed sand dunes, crept through rocky crevices, and slipped through paths that seemed impossible. Each time Rachel slumped forward in exhaustion, the rhythm of his breath pulled her back. Steady, measured. His warmth spread through her legs like an anchor, keeping her from drifting into unconsciousness. More than once, she felt herself slipping into the abyss. Sometimes a gust of wind, or the bounce of his gait, would jolt her back from the edge. She mumbled in half-sleep, "Anywhere, just don't take me back to that cliff." Near midnight, lights appeared, dim, distant, like a mirage rising from the sand. Rachel couldn't be sure if they were real. But then, those lights blinked in a pattern she knew by heart. The signal from Echo Ridge. Echo Ridge, where it had all started. She didn't know whether to call it salvation or a return to hell, but it was the only place left with water, medicine, and maybe a reason to keep breathing. At the same time, about a mile from the outpost, the night patrol was returning from a routine border check. Ellie Navarro drove the lead SUV. She narrowed her eyes at the silhouette up ahead, a figure mounted on a horse? "Stop the truck," she ordered. Everyone in the vehicle went still. No one had reported any patrol tonight, and certainly not anyone riding a horse. Especially not one without saddle or reins. They switched on the high beams, and the breath was sucked from the cab like a vacuum. There, in the glaring headlights, was a woman slumped forward on the back of a black horse. Her hands were tied behind her. Blood soaked her sleeves. She was unconscious, no reins, no signs of control. Ellie whispered, "Oh my God, that's Doc." A rookie beside her stammered, "Is she riding a wild horse?" No one answered. As the SUV rolled forward, Sable didn't flinch. He stood his ground, calmly turning his head to meet Ellie's gaze. Rachel slid off his back and collapsed to the ground. Ellie leapt out of the vehicle and caught her just before she hit the dirt. "Medic!" Ellie screamed. "Now!" The woman known throughout the station as Silent Doc now lay limp in her arms, bruised, bloodied, left for dead in the desert, and somehow brought back by a wild animal. No one spoke. A medic ran up, checked her pulse. Faint, but she's alive. Ellie looked at the black stallion still standing nearby, still unmoving, still watching. The horse that had brought someone back from the edge of death. That night, as Rachel received fluids and was transferred into the infirmary, Sable never left the outpost. He stood beneath the awning, no more than 20 paces from the infirmary door. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't leave. A few staff members approached with water, hay, apples. Sable refused them all. Each time someone came within 3 steps, he would turn his head, calm but firm. It was a kind of waiting no one had ever seen in a wild horse. At sunrise, as the first light broke over the razor wire, Ellie stepped outside the infirmary. There was Sable, still there. Unmoving. She whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't answer, but his eyes turned toward the infirmary door, toward the woman inside, as if he knew exactly where she was, and he wouldn't leave until he knew she was safe. At 6:12 a.m., Rachel opened her eyes. Her voice was a gravelly whisper, repeating a name no one understood. Sable. A nurse leaned in. "What did you say?" Rachel turned her face into the pillow. Tears streamed down her cheek, because she knew, on the other side of that door, a wordless soul was keeping her alive. Rachel woke up for the second time in the infirmary of Echo Ridge with that all-too-familiar ache. Sterile white lights above her, the sting of antiseptic pain radiating from every joint. But this time she wasn't trapped between memory and reality. She knew where she was. She knew she was alive. And she knew who had saved her. She turned her head toward the window. Just beyond the wire fence, still standing, was the black horse, unmoving. Its eyes fixed on her window like a silent sentinel. "Sable," she whispered, the name breaking apart in her throat like desert rock under pressure. The nurse on duty, a young man named Louis, looked up. "You say something, Doc?" Rachel didn't answer. She closed her eyes, trying to piece the memory together. The cliff, the rope, the searing heat, and then hooves, sweat. A rope pulling her back from the dead. Not a dream. It couldn't have been. Louis stood and carefully adjusted her IV. "You're no longer dehydrated. Doctor says you'll need to stay put for a few more days." Rachel gave a slow nod, then asked, "Where's Thorne?" Louis raised an eyebrow. "I think he's in command." "Why?" Rachel shut her eyes again. A vein pulsed at her temple. "Get me Ellie Navarro," she said quietly, firmly. "Only her. Tell her it's urgent." 30 minutes later, Ellie stepped into the room with a folder tucked under her arm. Her face was drawn, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Rachel," she said, "they told me you were awake. Jesus, we thought we lost you out there." Rachel said nothing. She gestured toward the door. When it closed behind them, she looked Ellie dead in the eyes. "I wasn't lost," Rachel said. "I was ambushed." Ellie frowned. "You're sure? The logs say you volunteered to patrol El Cencio alone. Just bad luck." "I never chose El Cencio," Rachel cut in. "Thorne gave me the map himself, told me there was unusual movement, but that sector wasn't part of any scheduled routes. And the map I had, it wasn't the one I signed for." Ellie went quiet. She pulled a document from her folder. "I just got a copy of the patrol log and your route assignment. Your name's on it. It's signed." Rachel snatched it, eyes scanning fast. The signature looked real, almost, but she spotted it, an arc slightly off, a tail not curved enough. "This is forged," she said. "I didn't sign this, and the map that morning, completely different from standard issue. He sent me into a dead zone, no signal, no backup, the perfect place for someone to disappear." Ellie sat down, her expression darkening. "If you're right, this isn't just a clerical error." Rachel nodded. "It's attempted murder." In the command room, Thorne Carlyle was reviewing weekly reports. He raised an eyebrow as Ellie entered, with Rachel behind her, IV tube still trailing from her arm, steps unsteady but her gaze sharp as a blade. "You're not cleared to leave medical," he said. "And you weren't cleared to alter my patrol route," Rachel replied, cold. Ellie raised the file. "I checked the server. The original map files were swapped out at 2:03 a.m. 3 days ago, logged in from a secondary command account. Only 3 people have access to that level. One of them is you." Thorne stood slowly. His expression didn't change, but Rachel caught the twitch in his jaw. "Accusing me?" "No," Rachel said. "We're investigating, and when we find proof, we won't accuse you. We'll arrest you." Their eyes locked in a silence thick enough to break bone. Ellie added, "I'm forwarding this to El Paso. Internal affairs will take over." Thorne let out a humorless laugh. "You don't know what you're poking at." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Funny. That's exactly what someone told me in Helmand, right before my squad was wiped out." She turned to leave, but the lights snapped off. Echo Ridge was swallowed by darkness. 1:34 a.m. The backup generator failed. Surveillance feeds went dead. In the distance, crashes, then gunfire. Rachel and Ellie didn't need instructions. They ran for the emergency weapons locker, grabbing Glocks, spare mags, and a flashlight. Glass shattered somewhere ahead. A figure in black rushed down the hallway. Ellie fired twice. The body dropped. "They're armed," she said, panting. "They're cleaning house," Rachel replied. "And the last part of the plan, kill the witness." From the hall, a scream, piercing, horse-like. "Sable," Rachel gasped. She ran, gun raised. Outside, under the flickering emergency lights, was a vision pulled from nightmare. Sable stood in the courtyard, facing 2 masked intruders. One already lay crumpled, chest caved in from a hoof. The second held a knife, backing away. The horse didn't retreat. It reared. Its hooves slammed the earth like war drums. Then it spun, launched a back kick directly into the attacker's chest. The man flew like a rag doll into the wall. Rachel rushed forward, clutching the horse's neck. "You did good, so good," Ellie shouted behind her. "Rachel, he's in the server room. Thorne's downloading everything." Rachel turned toward the command wing. If he wiped that data, the truth would die with it. She leaned into Sable's ear. "I need you. One last time." Sable nodded, and they ran, through smoke, through blood, through the betrayal hiding behind walls. Gunfire cracked through the narrow hallway, tearing into the darkness. Plaster exploded from the walls. Figures in black moved like shadows, armed, precise, wordless. Echo Ridge was no longer an outpost. It was a battlefield. Rachel barreled through the command center's door, her heart pounding like a war drum. Ellie stayed close behind, breath ragged, blood-smeared Glock in hand. The server room was at the end of the corridor, the vault that held the patrol data, mission logs, access history. If Thorne's people wiped the drives, all they'd have left was her word against a vanished trail. Boots pounded the stairs. A figure appeared, shouldering a mini grenade launcher. Rachel didn't hesitate. 2 shots, one to the thigh, one center mass. He went down hard. "How far to the server room?" Ellie gasped. "Right turn ahead," Rachel shouted, clenching her arm. Blood dripped from a jagged gash, shrapnel from earlier. They rounded the corner, and a bullet smacked into the wall inches from Rachel's head. She dove, pulling Ellie down with her. "Sniper," she hissed, and there he was, Thorne Carlyle. No longer in uniform, he wore tactical black, body armor under a rolled-up shirt, carbine rifle in hand. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were feral, cornered. "You just don't quit, do you?" he sneered. "I gave you a chance to walk. You wouldn't take it." Rachel aimed her Glock. "You fed me to the cartel," she said, voice low, trembling with rage. "You betrayed your team. You rerouted patrol data. You sold our border for blood money. And now you want to talk about chances?" Ellie stepped out, firing a warning volley. Thorne ducked behind a steel divider. "I know everything," she shouted. "The ghost account, the altered maps, the dead zones. You let people die for profit. For survival," Thorne bellowed. "You know what it's like, trying to keep this station running while Washington cuts us off? Do you think I wanted this?" A shrill scream echoed from the courtyard, a whinny, laced with fury. Rachel spun around. A dark blur flew down the hall. Sable. The wild horse stormed inside like a midnight hurricane, eyes blazing, flanks smeared in enemy blood. Before Rachel could react, Sable slammed his hooves into the steel door of the server room. Inside, 2 mercenaries fumbled with a demolition kit, too slow. One turned, just in time to catch a hoof to the face, jaw shattered. The other fled. Rachel didn't shoot. She didn't have to. Sable gave chase, a black blur of judgment and muscle. Within 3 minutes, the server room was secure. Ellie dropped to her knees, shaking as she scanned the drive. "Still here," she whispered. "All of it. Thank God." A blast from the main hallway, a scream, then silence. Rachel froze. She knew that breathing, that step, Thorne. She stepped out into the corridor. He was there, dragging someone. Luis, the young nurse, bound, bleeding. Thorne gripped a pistol, Luis a human shield. "Drop the gun," Thorne barked. "Now or I shoot him." Rachel and Ellie stopped cold. Thorne edged toward the front exit. He was going to run, but he didn't see, from the courtyard, another shadow. Sable. No bridle, no reins, no master. But as he thundered into the hallway, the ground seemed to shudder beneath his hooves. Thorne turned. Too late. Sable charged. Luis was flung clear. Thorne's rifle went flying. But he still had a sidearm. He drew it. Aimed. Bang! Sable screamed. Collapsed. Blood poured from his left flank. Rachel screamed. "No! No!" She charged, ducking left, firing. Her shot struck Thorne's shoulder, spinning him to the floor. He howled, tried to crawl. Ellie pounced, cuffs ready, slamming his face into the tile. Rachel dropped beside Sable. The horse wheezed, eyes fluttering. "Sable, don't you dare. Don't you leave me." Her hands pressed hard into the wound, hot blood soaking her palms. He looked up at her, one long breath, a twitch, then stillness. By dawn, Echo Ridge was a smoking ruin. The fighting had stopped, but the scent of gunpowder, blood, and something unspoken lingered in the air. Ellie sat slumped against a wall, clothes torn, face grimy, but her eyes burned. Thorne was bound, locked in an isolation cell awaiting transport from El Paso. The data was safe, the evidence secure. But one question remained. Sable. Rachel sat alone in the yard, her head resting against his neck, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, grief, and fear. Veterinarians from Tucson were en route, but Rachel knew every second that passed was a heartbeat slipping away. She leaned down, ear pressed to his ribs, a heartbeat, faint, but still there. "Stay with me. For me, for all of this, you have to stay." No more tears. She was far beyond them now. Everyone at the station understood. If Sable didn't make it, Echo Ridge would never be the same again. Because tonight, the traitor fell, and a wild horse bled for the truth. The first sunrise after the Echo Ridge attack rose in silence, as if even the sun dared not disturb the memories still smoldering in the air. There were no sirens, no boots stomping, only soft desert winds carrying the scent of rust, scorched rock, and dried blood across the shattered walls. In a corner of the outpost, beside a makeshift shelter, Rachel McAllister sat motionless, refusing to leave the side of the horse who had saved her life twice. Sable, wild, wounded, and magnificent, was still alive, but barely. The vets from Tucson had done everything they could. The bullet had missed vital organs, just grazing muscle. But the blood loss, the exhaustion from hours in the desert, it had pushed Sable to the edge of shock. To survive, he needed more than medicine. He needed a miracle, and the only miracle left was Rachel. She stayed, all day, all night, her hand resting gently on his neck. Every time his body trembled, she would lean in, whispering the same soft promise, "Hold on, I still owe you my whole life." People brought her water, coffee, even a fold-up chair. She refused it all. She wouldn't leave, not until Sable opened his eyes. And then, on the third morning, it happened. A deep breath. Rachel froze. She saw the faintest flutter in his eyelid. Then slowly, two dark eyes blinked against the rising light. "Sable?" she choked, her voice shattering like glass. He blinked. Then, against all instincts, tilted his head toward her. His muzzle, cold and damp, pressed into the worn calluses of her palm. At the entrance of the tent, Ellie Navarro stopped mid-step. She said nothing, just turned around quietly, closing the flap, leaving the moment for just the two of them. News of Sable spread across the country in less than a week. National TV reran drone footage from the night of the raid, grainy but undeniable. A wild horse had charged armed men, taken down a killer, shielded a woman with nothing left to give. Headlines screamed, "Desert War Horse Saves Border Hero." Traitor captured, wild Mustang becomes legend. One network even recreated the cliff rescue in CGI, like a blockbuster without a director. Rachel declined every interview. She made only one appearance at a high school in Yuma. Students had sent hundreds of handwritten letters asking, "Is Sable real?" Standing at a wooden podium, she spoke plainly, "He's not a miracle, he's my friend." When Sable recovered, he wasn't caged or claimed, he was free. Allowed to roam outside the Echo Ridge outpost, across fenced fields left open, no electric lines, no iron loops. Sometimes he disappeared for days, but always came back just before sunset, standing silently outside the infirmary window where Rachel once lay unconscious. Then, as some endings demand, Rachel turned down her promotion to headquarters in Phoenix. A man from Homeland Security asked her, "Wouldn't you prefer a desk job? Triple the salary, air conditioning." Rachel, eyes locked on Sable running across the red sand, answered, "I've had colder rooms than that, but only out here do I know I'm still alive." Ellie wasn't surprised when Rachel submitted a proposal no one had ever seen before. The project was called Echo Mustang Recon Unit, a pilot initiative working with local wild horses, not breaking them, not bridling them, letting them choose companionship. In the first meeting, Rachel stood and said, "I'm not asking you to trust. I'm asking, if a horse can pull someone back from the edge of death, can we afford to ignore that chance again?" The program was approved, on trial. Rachel chose Sierra Verde's border as home base, a stretch of sand with no stalls, just fresh water, dry hay, and the only thing that ever truly mattered, freedom. Sable wore a collar, soft leather, barely there, not to hold him, but to recognize him. On it, Rachel had carved by hand, not broken, just respected. Horses began to appear, from canyons, from hills. Not all stayed, but the ones that did gathered near Sable, drawn perhaps by something older than language. Children from nearby towns visited, reading aloud to the horses from storybooks. Sable never came too close, but every time Rachel stepped onto the field, he came. Not for food, not for habit, but for trust. One misty morning, rare in Sierra Verde, a border guard saw Sable standing in the middle of the yard, his body cloaked in fog like something risen from a forgotten dream. Rachel had just returned from patrol. She stepped out of her Jeep, took off her cap, and looked at him. No words. She walked forward, hand resting on his neck. "Ready again?" she asked, voice soft as dust. Sable tilted his head. No one else heard it, but somehow they all felt it. It was a yes. That morning, Rachel climbed onto his back. No saddle, no reins. From across the yard, Ellie folded her arms, smirking. "Heading back out?" Rachel nodded. Strange signal to the west. Nothing confirmed. "Be careful," Ellie called. "Not every time ends with a horse charging in to save you." Rachel laughed. "That's why this time I'm riding with him." She touched Sable's neck. He trotted forward, breaking through the mist like a curtain. And in that final image, as the first light tore through the clouds, They saw her. A woman in a sun-faded tactical vest, riding a pitch-black Mustang, crossing into the burning horizon of Sierra Verde. She never looked back, because the guardian of the border and her four-legged brother were never meant for what's behind. If you believe that some wild creatures were born to protect humans, drop a 1 in the comments below. If you've ever felt that survival can come from the most unexpected places, comment 0. And if Rachel's journey and the bond with the Mustang Sable made your heart skip a beat, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story, where freedom, loyalty, and life are told through the eyes of those who can never be tamed.